A question that is more important than most issues in life. Are you a caramel or a pistachio flavored ice cream person? I thought I'd start this video differently with a story, a bit of context around why I'm talking about the Oyster Perpetual today. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited out to a beer garden. Very nice place. I'll share a picture on the screen. And there were about 10 of us guys meeting there, and it would be an all-day thing. Now, naturally, being the watch enthusiast, I think to myself, what's the best kind of watch to wear in this situation? Do you really want to make the first impression that you're a Rolex wearer? Do people even pay attention? The truth is, they don't. After a few hours, we're all settling down. There's about 10 of us there. I started looking around at the wrists and the watches that everyone's wearing. Of the 10 of us, 6 of us were wearing Rolexes. And of that 6, 5 were Oyster Perpetuals. A 41mm sunbrush blue, one of the most recent green dials, a grape dial, which was nice to see, 39mm white dial, and there was a gloss black in there as well. And it just got me thinking that the simplest watches that Rolex offers in their family are being worn and enjoyed by people who probably don't know much about watches in the first place. And also the fact that 10 years ago, I don't think I would have seen such a concentrated collection of Oyster Perpetuals in one place. I guess it shows a lot about how times have changed, how tastes have changed, and for the better. I think there is a lot to learn from it. Let's get into the video. We live in a world of ever-increasing complexity. Smart devices that track our every movement, cars that do the driving for us. Even the watches that we so enjoy too often are praised for their complications over their design refinements. Society pushes it onto us that we should thrive in this complexity. But in fact, complexity, it's exhausting. 9 times out of 10, less is always better. And I guess we've seen this littered all over the watch front, how brands seem so focused on the future, reinventing themselves to meet current demands and trends, sizes, colors, fads, only to realize that they likely went too far and they revert back to those earlier designs that made them so great in the first place. 2 very current and clear examples of this. Omega releasing the new Railmaster. Yes, it's basically just an Aquaterra case and bracelet with a Railmaster dial dropped into it, but we could say similar about the releases that arrived all the way back in 2003. Over 20 years later, and Omega is returning back to the cult classic roots of the original Railmaster. Breitling and their top timeline, the B31. Apparently there were a lot of requests for these to be made. Great looking models, I'm sure I'll make a video about them in the future. But what about these racing chronographs? The reality is what I and every other Breitling enthusiast wants to see is a faithful reinterpretation, a modern reinterpretation of the original top time chronograph from the 60s. These were outstanding pieces of design at their time, real icons. I believe that these could contend with the Speedmaster if they're done well enough. And I'm sure they will eventually circle around and make these when all else is exhausted. Right, with that tangent out of the way. In our world that is so obsessed with complex issues, complicated machinery, the novel idea of owning a simple watch, I believe, is becoming more relevant as time goes by. Ones that are technically competent with great specs, that's comfortable and appropriate to wear anywhere, and does not draw attention to itself. Maybe it has a subtle touch of color, and it doesn't require any effort from our side to pull off on a daily basis. There are so many good examples of these, but that's where I think the humble Oyster Perpetual has always positioned itself, and all the while never seeming to break with tradition. We've said it many times before, but Rolex is one of those rare exceptions to the rules that seems to govern the watch industry. They have a mythical status surrounding them, I guess trumped up by marketing and all the rest, that anything they do, whether questionable or not, is correct. But it's actually because they genuinely don't put tons of effort into reinventing themselves. They are one of the most consistent brands, and that consistency has paid off. They don't try hard, and the truth is they don't need to. Their marketing and advertising machine is top-notch. Their designs have made a serious dent over the last 50 years, and the demand for their watches has done the rest. On a deeper level, the brand has lived up to the reputation that they have painstakingly crafted and pushed over the decades. Now sure, they have made mistakes. There are plenty of model lines that no longer exist for one reason or another. The formula for so much of what they produce now revolves around a handful of variables, which are far easier for them to follow, to stick to the plan. But Rolex's timeline over the last 10 years fascinates me. It always does. And more so, how our pursuit of desirable models evolved. The late 20-teens, we were all driven to own and pursue professional models. GMTs, Submariners, Daytonas, they were the hot ticket items. Yes, they still are today. But the real turning point was 2020. where the Oyster Perpetual landed with these highly expressive and saturated dials, an updated look that changed the playing field and their desirability. Let's be honest with ourselves here. 10 years ago, the Oyster Perpetual was probably the last watch that we would have taken seriously in Rolex's catalogue. I mean, they have always been fairly generic in design. Nothing exciting with regards to their bezels, their bracelets. Their colors have always been quite simple. It's always been known as the entry-level baseline watch from the brand. But of course there were some rare exceptions that in hindsight we should have paid more attention to. When the OP39s arrived for the first time, rhodium dials, grape dials, sunbrushed blue, that olive green with orange accents was always a nice combination, and a personal favorite of mine, which still deserves to be in the catalogue. It's very unfortunate that it's not. The 39mm white dial. Simple and brilliant in so many ways. There's something that not many of us seem to talk about. When we move all of the other mainline watches aside and we look at the Oyster Perpetual, it's a line that has continued to reinvent itself over the years. And they all still look very good for it. None of them look dated, none of them look old-fashioned, or products of their time, if you get what I mean. And we know that when these pop colors arrived, the mustard yellow, the coral red, that Tiffany blue, these were the catalysts, resulting in a perfect storm, at a time where the demand for Rolex watches were going up so much, at a time where the demand for these bright colors seemed to be everywhere. And even now, 5 years on, these Tiffany blue dials are selling at auction houses for the most ridiculous prices. You know, Rolex took the relatively mundane and simple, extremely basic Oyster Perpetual watch, pushed them out of the door, to a point where people were wanting them over the professional watches. And Rolex, not normally being the trendsetter in this instance, they inspired whole generations of collections from other brands. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking about Zinn and what they did with the 556. I'm thinking of Oris, what they did with the Candy collection. One of their chief rivals, Omega, and the Shades collection. And if I remember right, just last year, Nomos, with a collection of something like 28 variations of these pieces. 5 years later, the demand for these has not disappeared. Now, in this transitional period, there was also the introduction of a very peculiar Petri dish-inspired anniversary celebration dial. I don't know what they called this thing. And this design, it's just a mess. In fact, I'll recommend a video I made a year ago about this watch, where I went in and remedied its dial to look all the more clean. And seeing how Rolex has taken this and transitioned very casually over to more Pantone pastel colors of beige, pistachio green, and purple. These may very well be some of the best color configurations we've seen with these watches for, I would say, a decade. So these pastel colors, they took me by surprise, and I think in a good way. I can't say I was much of a fan of these effervescent, brightly saturated colors, but the more toned down pastel pieces, they sort of fit with what I wear. We often talk about how Rolex as a brand has a finger on the pulse, how they can very much detect where trends might be going, where they might be leading to. An example like the Land Dweller and how it arrived this year could be seen as a hit or miss example, but how these Oyster Perpetuals have changed, very much with the time. How 5 years ago, so much about the watch collecting space which we didn't enjoy was about the look-at-me nature of watch wearing. So many people were going mad for these brightly colored dials because it was more about showing off than really being subtle and restrained, where the pastel colors, they are doing the opposite. They're more in line with the trends of 2025. They're more discreet, they're more subtle, far more complementary as everyday wearing watches, and could very easily be a one and done. I really enjoy seeing that interplay of the bright and effervescent and the muted options and the times when they were introduced. And no doubt, I believe that this direction is going to spur on many other brands to follow suit. Personally, I'm here for it. I think these softer colors are so much more attractive. Not gaudy or garish, perfectly fitting into that Oyster Perpetual ethos. Over the last 10 years, we have seen 3 very distinct generations of how the Oyster Perpetual has evolved. Not all for the better. I think I speak for a lot of us when I say that I miss the simple stick baton dial instead of the double batons at the quarters. I speak for even more of us when I say that the white dial should stay in their catalogue. It should never have left. And maybe some of that charm of the grape dial, the rhodium dial, the olive dial, it's been lost. But I do believe without that launch, without that intervention of these bright colors, we would not see the Oyster Perpetual as it is now. I think their arrival was a shake-up to bring eyes onto them. And now, 5 years on, we're seeing more restrained and less complex examples. The Oyster Perpetual is a great case study. It's a meeting point of many different things. Now, Rolex as a brand has continued to reinvent these designs, but none of which seem to be products of their time. And what is surprising is that they don't appear too drastic in design either. How a brand as big as this, that makes the most amount of money from their precious metals and their in-demand professional watchers can put time aside to focus on their most simple, humble watch in their collection. There is definitely a lesson to be learned here that simplicity always outweighs complexity in the long run. And the question that I leave to you is beige or pistachio? What is your preference? Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.